All right, DT2 Comics Chat here with my weekly live comics chat. What we're going to talk about today is Thor, the End of the World. Now, what do I mean by that? The Thor, the End of the World. Is that a movie title? No, probably should be, but that's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about is the mysterious uh, Instagram post and the mysterious tweet that Hemsworth put out where he was saying that it sounded like a goodbye to the fans. It sounded like he was thanking the fans for, the time he served as the character, and that he was basically just saying goodbye, is what it sounded like. So let me pull that up so we can look at that first. Okay. I'm trying to make the screen small enough so you can see everything. Okay. So let me pull that up so we can see that. There we go. Let me put me at the bottom. Okay. So this is Culture Crave's tweet. Chris Hemsworth released a statement that thanks Marvel fans for supporting him as Thor. Playing Thor has been one of the greatest honors of my life. For the last 15 years, I've held Mjolnir. I used to say Mjolnir when I was a kid, but it's actually Mjolnir. And then Stormbreaker, which that wasn't Stormbreaker. Don't get me started on Betty Ray Bill and how much that stupid axe thing was not Stormbreaker, but anything. That axe, stupid axe. That's right. That's what I said. It's a stupid axe. That's not Stormbreaker. But anyway, Stormbreaker as the god of thunder. But what made it truly special was sharing it with all of you. Your passion, your cheers, and your love for this character have meant everything to me. Thank you for making my journey through the MCU unforgettable. Next up, Doomsday. Now, right off the bat, what I have to say to that is, man, what a way to go out with some class. I got to give it to Hemsworth, man. What a way to bring, the end of your time as a character, or bring to a conclusion what you're doing. And, thanking the fans and talking about how much he enjoyed it and connecting with us one last time, actor to audience. And that is just pure class as far as I'm concerned. So I've got to give Hemsworth his props for what he said and the way he said it. Because like Tom Cruise, he's truly a professional. Like Tom Cruise, he really understands the connection between entertainer and audience. So Hemsworth did not Zegler himself at all. So that's awesome. However, the nature of this statement makes it sound like he's definitely saying goodbye. So I posted a tweet earlier today because it's two different things. Do they mean an end to the Thor character in the MCU altogether? And if they mean that, do they mean somebody else is going to replace him? Because if they do, then they probably mean Jane Foster. Or does he mean the end of Hemsworth as Thor? Like there's going to be another Thor after the inevitable reboot, but it won't be played by Hemsworth. So that's kind of coming anyway. But I'm trying to understand, like so many of us, what Hemsworth meant by these statements. Because it was been buzzing all last week that Thor was going to die either in Doomsday or Secret Wars. And that was the thing that, somehow it was going to be the end of the character. And either Hemsworth said or an article said, I don't quite remember who said it, that they were going to give him a spectacular death. They were going to give him a spectacular ending. He was going to go out in a blaze of glory. And they were going to try to give him something that's, worthy of an exit for Marvel's God of Thunder. So let me start off right by saying, because we're going to answer those questions and I'm going to look at some other stuff. Let me start off right by saying, I hope that is not what happens. There is nothing wrong with a happy ending. I don't understand why these writers today why they think everything has to be sad and tragic and depressing. Don't understand that. There's nothing wrong if Thor survives the events and becomes King Thor like he should have been all along, because don't get me started on how wrong King Valkyrie is. Don't get me started on how ridiculous that is. And King Thor goes back and restores Asgard and stays in the Asgardian realm and rules over what remains of his people. And then, they start increasing and having families again. And basically, Thor is spending his immortal time restoring Asgard to its former glory, or making it an even greater glory than it was before. What is wrong with that ending? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that ending as far as I'm concerned. We had Tony give his life in Endgame to save the universe. So we had Hulk give his arm, but that wasn't enough to do it. So we had Tony give his entire life to reverse the snap in Endgame, and Natasha gave her life to get the Soul Stone. So we already had one injury and two deaths in Endgame. So we don't need more deaths. Lord have mercy. We don't need more deaths, as far as I'm concerned, in Doomsday and Secret Wars. If you want to bring an end to this version of the MCU, and they will because they have to, I say give people a happy ending, and then, because they started to kind of do it with Deadpool and Wolverine with the Fox characters, because that movie was about rewriting reality, about resetting the universe. And we're sure that's what's going to happen in both Doomsday and Secret Wars. Is going to be an MCU reset. But that don't mean you have to kill everybody. They can ride off into the sunset. So just wanted to throw that out there, because it just doesn't need to happen. So before we dive into answering those questions any further, the next thing that I want to talk about is we have never really gotten the real Thor. Not really in the MCU. Not really. Okay. So I see there's some more pictures I have to pull up. Now, those of you that are longtime comic fans like me, I know you know this stuff. But I also know I get some people that view me and watch my channel that don't. So that's why many times I go over comic history, because I aim to be educational and informative in my videos, in my entertainment, in my Twitter. I want people to learn things, because I told you I learned how to read on comics, and my father introduced me to them, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. And I still love them to this day. So I'm hoping to pay that love forward to new generations of people, to encourage them to read comics. So those of you that are long time readers like I am, I know you know this stuff. But when I do comic history stuff, it's for those that may be watching me for the first time, or that maybe don't know the history of the character. So I will restate my perspective in that we have never gotten the actual Thor in the MCU. What we got was a hybrid of the Ultimate Thor and main 616 in a comic store. We got a mix. Everything, especially in the early MCU, was a hybrid. They pulled a lot from Ultimates. As a matter of fact, the first Avengers movie was almost all Ultimates, except they still didn't have the Pyms. They swapped out Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne, or Janet Pym, for Hawkeye and Black Widow. So it's not a one-to-one translation from the Ultimates, but I'll say a good 85 to 90% of the first Avengers movie was literally Ultimates #1. And so the Thor we've gotten hasn't really been the full comic book Thor. Now, there's Thor in Norse mythology. So Marvel didn't invent Thor as a character. So just like there's Greek mythology, and there's, every culture has their myths and their pantheons and all that different kind of stuff. There is Norse mythology, and that's where Thor actually comes from. And he's different from the God of Thunder that we know in the Marvel Universe. So he was definitely comic bookized. And I want to show you who did that. Who did that was Jack Kirby. So let me pull that up. so you can see what I'm talking about. Where are you? There you are. Okay. Now you see that on your screen. This is an article by Screen Rant, and this is talking about the most influential Thor artists. So y'all, well, wait, I look better. No, I look better on the side, so you can see the whole thing. Yeah. So Kirby illustrated the character from 62 to 70, 1962 to 1970. He remains one of the longest running artists on the character, which he helped adapt for Marvel Comics. There's the key. He helped adapt the Norse mythological character of Thor to the comic book character that we know. Kirby is the man that designed his costume and the first to conceptualize Asgard, Hel, Jotunheim, and everything in between. Kirby could have kept the character strictly rooted in the realm of fantasy, but his choice to incorporate elements of science fiction proved key to the success of the comics, and it's this look that has continued to inspire artists to this day. Without Kirby, there wouldn't be a Rainbow Bridge, the Warriors 3, or the Destroyer. Without Kirby, Thor wouldn't be Thor. And that's very, very key. And I always want to be sure that I tip my hat to the original creators, because for some reason there's a group, a cluster of people that seem to hate the founding fathers of comics, and they seem to hate, comic origins and where everything really comes from. I don't understand it, but I know it's real. And a lot of it just lives on Twitter, but they seem to hate the people that gave us what we have, which has never made any sense to me. But anyway, I always like to give honor where honor is due. And Jack Kirby is the one that gave us the Thor that we know from the comics. Now, what those of you that are not comic readers also may not know is that when we actually first meet Thor in the comics, he's not Thor. He's hidden in human form, because in the comics, what actually happened was Odin cast him out, like in the movie. That part was right, except Odin gave him amnesia, so he didn't remember he was the Odin's son. He didn't remember that he was the god of thunder, and he was locked into a mortal cripple body. Okay? And the character's name was Donald Blake. Now, we meet Donald Blake as a joke in the first Thor movie. He's this alias, and you see his name on, a tag, and it's kind of a joke. And it's kind of a wink and a nod to this. But actually what happens in the comics is Donald Blake is a doctor, and he's a doctor that walks with a cane, and that's his only memory of life. And he, quote unquote, stumbles upon the hammer of Thor while exploring a cave, and then he finds the inscription. Now, you should be familiar with the inscription. Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. Okay? Now, they made fun of that in Age of Ultron because Hawkeye had a little quick line about, whosoever he be worthy shall have the power, whatever. That's what he's talking about, because there's an actual inscription. And you can see that in the movie as well. But there's an actual inscription. And then Donald Blake figures out to strike the hammer on the ground. And when he strikes the hammer on the ground, then he takes his form as Thor, Odin's son, the Norse god of thunder. So for a while, Thor had the dual identity. So it's very similar to Captain Marvel Shazam from Fawcett Comics, or from the DC side, where Billy Batson, had his identity and his life as Billy. But when he needed to call on the captain, he said his magic word and he would transform. So Thor's comic origins was rooted in that type of dynamic, where he's mortal and he's crippled, but his cane, when he strikes it on the ground, becomes Mjolnir, becomes his hammer, and he turns into his regular Asgardian body. So eventually he remembers, and eventually they get rid of Donald Blake, and then a couple years ago they brought Donald Blake back as a villain, and it's just like anything else. What's that line from The Dark Knight? You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. So a lot of things have happened over the years, but they did hit a point where they got rid of Donald Blake altogether, and Thor was just Thor all the time. He didn't have that dual existence, but this is how he started. For those of you that don't know that, long-time comic readers know exactly what I'm talking about. But for those of you that don't, so we have never seen this like this in the MCU. We've never seen him, because what we see with Thor in his first movie is we see him struggling to learn humility, and we see him struggling to be worthy to again be called Odin's son. And we see him because Odin saw he was out there, causing fights, and he was basically just wilding out. He's basically just being a young man, really, just kind of reveling in his power and loving to fight and instigating stuff. And Odin was like, "You're not worthy with all that brashness and that arrogance. That's not how a king acts." So when he was on Earth, he remembered all that, and he found the hammer, but he couldn't lift it because he wasn't worthy. So his arc in his first MCU movie was about him learning humility, learning how to sacrifice, learning how it's not a joke and it's not a game. Other people's lives on the line, and learning how to be worthy of being a king. Unfortunately, in every movie after that first one, they regressed his character again, and they had to relearn and stuff all over again. And it just got on my nerves. But anyway, so that was the original idea. So we've never seen. So if you don't read the comics, you have really no idea who the comic book Thor really, really was and his background. Okay. Now I'm going to briefly show you a couple of my favorite Thor artists. The first one is Olivier Coipel. Let me pull that up so you can see what I'm talking about. Now, Kirby's the originator, but Coipel, I think, presents Thor in the way I like to see him best. That is my favorite Thor look. And also the chainmail on his arms, because I know his early costume has his arms bare, but with the chainmail, he's still got his red cape, and he's got his helmet, because he doesn't really wear his helmet that much in the MCU, but he's got his helmet. So to me, that is one of the most definitive Thor looks. And again, we didn't get this in the MCU, but that's the look that I personally enjoy the most. But there's another, and I cannot talk about the best Thor artist without mentioning Walt Simonson. Absolutely cannot. Okay, so let me pull that up so you can see it. Simonson's Thor was definitive as far as I was concerned. So he's got his helmet, he's got his long, flowing, golden locks. But look at the action of how while he's whirling his hammer. I love the way Simonson does that, seeing the hammer flash by as Thor is twirling it to make himself fly. And he's got the classic Kirby costume, and that has the bare arms and the red and black wristband. So that's the classic Kirby costume, except the boots are a little bit more exaggerated. They're a little bit bigger. The top flare on the boot is a little bit bigger in general, but that to me is one of the best Thor looks. So between Coipel and Simonson, as far as I'm concerned, those are the best looks I've ever seen for Thor. And I still love them to this day. And so let me know in the comments what your best looks are, your favorite artists for Thor. Now, unfortunately, in the MCU, we went through the Dark World. Now, I know a lot of people say it's the worst Marvel movie. I don't think Thor: The Dark World is the worst Marvel movie. I just think it was very disjointed. As a movie, it does the same thing with Jane that Smallville does with Lana Lang. It has to manufacture a shoehorn a way to fit her in, because Lana Lang's arc was done after season 3 of Smallville. Every season after season 3, they had to find a way to keep Lana on the show because her arc was done. So in Thor: The Dark World, that's the same thing they did with Jane. Out of all the people in the world to discover the ether is Thor's girlfriend, really? So there was that. And the biggest mistake, one of the things you have to learn as a writer is it's the connection between the antagonist and the protagonist that makes the story, the most juicy, the most intense, the most interesting. And Thor didn't really have a lot of direct connection to the Keebler elves, as I call them. He didn't really have, they were after the ether. And so the ether wasn't Jane. So that's what involved Thor. But it wasn't a direct animosity with him kind of thing. And so that will always dilute your story. Like once we found out, spoiler alert, that Darth Vader was Luke's father, you should know that by now. That's been out since 1980. Once we found that out, they changed everything. It completely changed the entire dynamic of Star Wars and still has impacted Star Wars to this day. Once we find out that the main protagonist of the original trilogy, that the well, I don't know if you would call Vader the main villain, the co-antagonist, Palpatine and Vader, that Vader is Luke's father and then Leia's father too, changed everything. So there's a connection there. See, there's no connection between Thor and the Keebler elves in the Dark World, which is a huge mistake. Number three, interesting character in all the movies is always Loki. You always have a writing challenge. See, when you write, you're supposed to make your main character the most interesting character. They should be the most fun character. They should be the one that everybody wants to look at. They should be the one who everything revolves around. Problem is, Hiddleston as Loki is so perfect. Hiddleston as Loki is so pitch perfect. Could not be any more pitch perfect. His hurt at finding out he was adopted, his duality of being a frost giant, we should never bring up again after the first movie, which was a waste. But the idea of him being hurt, feeling jilted, and being the trickster that Loki's always been. Hiddleston nails it. He's nailed it from the beginning. He steals the show, whatever movie's in. Whenever Loki shows up, he steals the show. And so that makes Thor even less interesting by comparison, I'm sad to say. So there were definitely problems with Thor the Dark World, and they didn't need to kill Frigga either. I don't know what this obsession is with killing characters, but it seems like they think it's necessary. That didn't have to happen. The story could have continued just as it was. It didn't motivate Thor to be any different. So leave me some comments about what you think about that. And then we get to Ragnarok. Ragnarok is where the God of Thunder turned into a joke. They had the God of Thunder being defeated by an electrical charge. I just want you to let that in. He kept getting zapped by an electrical charge and that would knock him out. The God of lightning and thunder was being felled by an electrical charge. I can't. And it was this weird humor, and it was so Thor Ragnarok was the Batman Forever of the Thor movies. So in Batman Forever, Schumacher began to turn it, neon and began to turn it campy and had, much too much humor and moved away from Burton's kind of heavier, gloomy, schizophrenic, weird goth tone into this kind of, Katy Perry Candyland tone and aesthetic. So Thor Ragnarok was the Batman Forever of the Thor movies. And then Thor Love and Thunder was the Batman and Robin of the Thor movies, because Batman and Robin with Clooney under Schumacher was just pure camp. It was just Schwarzenegger was over the top, Poison Ivy was over the top, and Bane was, what was that? We still don't know what that was, but anyway, that's what Thor Love and Thunder was. A complete descent into everything that is not Thor. And then we get probably the most hated image in Infinity War and the most hated development of the character. We get that with this. Let me pull that up. Hold on. Right here. And we all know that as Fat Thor, because he's so depressed. Remember, I told you they regress him in every movie. And when we get to Infinity War and Endgame, is no different. So they have to regress him, then he has to come back, then he has to repower up. So when he shows up and he's repowered again, he's got Stormbreaker, He's back to being himself again. But for a while, he was this guy. He was what we colloquially refer to as Fat Thor. He was depressed, unsure of himself. He was drinking himself into a stupor every day. He was just sitting in his cabin, not doing anything. They had to go find him. And this is one of the worst things that happened to the God of Thunder in the MCU. Because of Taika Waititi in Ragnarok and Love and Thunder, the God of Thunder becomes a joke. He becomes an absolute joke. And I don't know anybody that liked these developments with Thor. If you're one of the few people that like Fat Thor and you liked, comical Thor, let me know in the comments below. But I don't know anybody that was down with this. I just wasn't rocking with this on any level. Okay? So that brings me to what we were talking about earlier, and that is Hemsworth's post, is that his farewell? So let's examine each one of those questions that I talked about. So is it the end of Thor as a character in the MCU, meaning they're going to kill him? That's literally the last thing I want to see happen, because he's been humiliated enough, number one. Number two, because we've already had 2 heroic sacrifices between Natasha, who didn't even get a funeral. Everybody's crying over Tony, and she was mentioned by Clint, in a conversation, but she didn't get a funeral. So Natasha gave her life for the Soul Stone, and then Tony gave his life to reverse the snap. So we've already had 2 heroic sacrifices to conclude the Thanos saga. So I personally do not need to see more of them. So I'm telling you right now, if they kill Thor in this movie, I would probably, or either one of the movies, Doomsday or Secret Wars, I'll probably only watch them one time, because I don't need to see that. I really don't. Even if he dies heroically, I have no desire to see that. I'd rather see him ride off into the sunset with Sif, not Jane, because he's supposed to be with Sif, not Jane, and become King Thor and reestablish Asgard and cause Asgard to grow again, to become a thriving community. And then in the future, in the inevitable reboot, when they need to bring Thor back into the comics with a new actor, he comes, barreling down out of Asgard with all his lightning and thunder and bluster like he did in Endgame, and then we reintroduce him, and that'll be awesome. Won't be Hemsworth, he'll be recast then, of course, but what's wrong with that? So if they kill him in these movies, I'm probably only going to watch them one time, just saying, most likely. I'm probably only going to do that anyway, because I'm not excited about seeing them. So there's that. Option 1. Option 2 is that it's the end of Thor in the MCU, but they don't kill him. So like I said, I hope they give him that happy ending where he can ride off in the sunset with Sif and become King Thor, because King Valkyrie is just a joke and an abomination and an insult. And Thor abandoning his people like that. Remember, in the very first movie, he learned how to be a king again. He learned humility. He learned how to sacrifice. He learned there were things in life that were bigger than him. He learned not to start fights just for the heck of it. He learned his lessons because he was able to pick up his hammer again. Remember? So he should take over leadership of his people, whoever's left, reestablish Asgard, and ride off on the Rainbow Bridge. So that's option 2. It's the end of Thor as a character, but he gets a satisfying conclusion. At least that's the one I would want. I'm not speaking for everybody. I'm speaking for me. Option 3, do they mean it's just the end of Hemsworth playing Thor, which that is pretty much a definite yes, no matter what else happens. Because we know that with Doomsday and Secret Wars, they're going to wrap up all of the MCU threads. They're stunt casting and nostalgia baiting these movies to try to get us to watch them, because they think that if they bring back all these characters, because we got the MCU Avengers, we got the Fox X-Men, they were even talking about establishing a relationship between Ian McKellen's Magneto and Elizabeth Olsen's Scarlet Witch and Pietro. But which version of Pietro are we going to get? And then also the Fantastic Four are being ported over as well. So it's going to be everybody and their mama in Avengers Doomsday and everybody and their mama in Avengers Secret Wars. So that's going to be the conclusion of the MCU that started in 2008 as we knew it. Because I still think what they're going to do is they're going to port some new characters, but I'll get there in a minute. So pretty much as a given that option 3, this is the last run of Hemsworth as Thor. That's pretty much a guarantee. Either way, we're probably not going to see him against Thor because they're going to have to reboot the MCU with all new characters. All new actors with these characters. But what I actually think is going to happen along that tip, let me pull that up so you can see them while I'm talking about it. What I actually think is going to happen on that tip is I think they are going to restart the new MCU, if you will. I think they are going to restart that with, hold on, I'm pulling the picture up. Tired of these fuzzy pictures, man. I'm trying to find some high-res pictures. Can a brother get some high-res pictures? I'm trying to get it, y'all. I'm trying. Okay. No, that one doesn't have. Oh, okay. Let's see if this one has any type of. Nope, that's tiny too. Okay, let me go with this one. That looks like that might be worth looking at. There we go. Okay. What I think they're going to do is I think they're going to reboot the new MCU with the Young Avengers. Okay. Another junior Iron Man, Patriot, another junior Captain America, Amadeus Cho, or some other Hulk. Wiccan, Cassie Lang, Kate Bishop, Speed, Wiccan and Speed are Wanda and Vision's kids. They may have Vision as their leader, which would make sense if he survives everything that happens, because it was kind of that way in the comics. America Chavez are going to have Ironheart, of course. They're going to have Ironheart and all that. So this is what I think is coming. I think they think, because Feige thinks this way, he's proven to us that he's all about replacing all the classic characters with their updated modern audience, so much better than them in every way characters. He's about replacing the males with the females. He's about replacing any white characters with another ethnicity. So Young Avengers accomplishes a lot of that. It ticks a lot of those boxes. And Feige has proven to us over and over and over and over again, he's more concerned about ticking boxes. As a matter of fact, there's an article that came out this week that said that Feige and Bob Iger are arguing because what Bob Iger wants is more action-oriented movies and movies that can get the MCU back into profitability. Because once you are used to making billion-dollar movies, because the MCU made some of the biggest movies of all time, once you kind of get a taste of that level, why would you never want that level? Why would you want anything less? So I can't really say. And as much money as Disney has lost just this year alone, Captain America: Brave New World didn't make his money back. Thunderbolts didn't make his money back. With all this flops going on, that's why they're throwing the kitchen sink together in Avengers: Doomsday and Secret Wars, because they think that's going to make us come back to the pre-Endgame levels of audience participation. I do not think so. I do not think that even with all the nostalgia bait and even bringing in all the original Avengers and bringing in the Fox X-Men and bringing in the Fantastic Four and bringing in some extra characters on top of that, maybe even the Defenders, I still don't think that's going to do it. I know that's what they think, but I don't agree. And the reason why is because we are at a different stage as fans and as an audience. And not just as comic fans, because they never made movies for us comic fans anyway. Not just as comic fans, but I mean the normies too. And we've hit the worst stage you can ever hit when you talk about creative works, and that is apathy. Just don't care. Just don't care. Comic fans still read comics, and many of us are reading trade paperbacks now and back issues. Many of us are going back to the stories we grew up on, however old you are, and whatever era of comics that was for you, because the comic shops are now reporting that back issues are selling better than new issues because nobody wants this woke mess. I keep telling you that the modern audience is a myth. I don't know who said it, but I mentioned it on Twitter. Do you remember a while back somebody said that they thought that everybody was just, we were all bigots and we were just all phobes. And they believed that for every traditional fan they lost, they would gain 3 new more woke or modern audience fans. You remember that? I forgot who said it, but somebody said that last year. Well, how's that worked out for you? There is no such thing as a modern audience in terms of them being large enough to sustain $1 billion multi-movie franchise. Wouldn't they have done it with Captain America Brave New World? If it was all about Sam Wilson as Captain America, and he's the best Cap ever, and he doesn't need the super soldier formula, and you just hate him because he's a black man and all that yang. See, then people live on Twitter. Then people live on Twitter, but that's the only place they live. They don't actually go to the movies. They just rage bait on Twitter. Because if there was any truth to that, wouldn't there be the $1 billion support? See, because you need comic fans, you need hate watchers, and you need lots and lots of normies if you want to hit that $1 billion mark. You can't get there without a majority normie audience because there aren't enough comic fans and there are not enough hate watchers to push you up to those levels. So if there was any truth to the idea that there's such a thing as a modern audience, that is just a concept. So if there really are people who really want to see legacy characters replaced, and I've had some people unfollow me on Twitter, and some of them did it angrily, and some of them did it cordially. I had a conversation with a couple of people about why they unfollowed me, and they said because they believe so strongly that we ought to turn white characters black. And they disagreed with me so vehemently until they don't want to follow me no more. Okay. So I'm not saying that there aren't people that feel that way. I'm saying that the concept of a modern audience as a big enough group of people to sustain $1 billion movie franchise is just a very small but loud minority that live on Twitter. And so the powers that be made the mistake of taking that seriously and thinking that you could change the sexuality and change the race band, and you could gender swap, just like the new Wonder Man that's coming out. He's race swapped. He's an Ultimate's Wonder Man. He's a person of color now. And the Wonder Man that we've known from the comics for years has always been white. And being white is central to his character because his brother, the Grim Reaper, is actually a white supremacist. So it's actually important that Wonder Man stay Caucasian because that's part and parcel of his backstory and where he comes from as a character. But they said, nope. We know you've been reading about Simon all these years, and Wonder Man actually has a much bigger fan base than even I knew. And you've been reading about Simon all these years, but when we bring him to the small screen, to Disney Plus, yep, nope, got to be a man of color. Yep, nope, sorry. It's Lucy with the football and Charlie Brown trying to kick the football. How many times are you going to fall for that? How many times is it going to take for you to understand that the powers that be, they hate you, they hate the classic traditional legacy characters, they hate that you love them, and they hate making money. They don't want to give the fans what they want. They don't want to make money. They don't want to make people happy. it's turned into a bunch of rage baiters. How many times does Lucy have to pull the football out from underneath Charlie Brown's feet before he get it? So how many times do we have to go through this? How many times do they have to drop an Ironheart? Do they have to drop a Wonder Man? How many times do they have to do that? Now, I know you're going to say, well, Dave, these shows were shot and made back when woke was in, and so they're just dumping all their content. Might be some truth to that. Maybe it'd be some truth to that. But do you really think, with Feige being known to be now arguing with Bob Iger, Feige's position is that he wants more social commentary. That's what he wants. That's what he's wanted all along. So that's why when they got rid of the Marvel Quality Control Board with Ike Perlmutter, that's when Feige took over, and that was the beginning of the end of the MCU. That's when Captain Marvel came in. Captain Marvel's movie should have been Black Widow's movie. The movie positioned between Infinity War and Endgame should have been the Black Widow movie, not Captain Marvel. How they couldn't see that was beyond me. That was Natasha's spot, especially since she was going to die in Endgame. That's the perfect spot. But they didn't give it to her, did they? They gave it to Captain Marvel, who was shoehorned in at the last minute because Feige wanted her in. He publicly stated that his goal was to turn at least half the characters in the MCU female. So not necessarily gender swapping, but being sure that the conglomeration of characters was at least half and half on the men and the women. And then they have that big, obvious shot in Endgame with the A-Force or all of the women in one spot, which is ridiculous. They're on that huge battlefield fighting Thanos and his army and his minions. And somehow magically all the women are in the same place. From the Wasp to Pepper in her iron, armor, and Valkyrie, and what's her name? Okay, I'm saying it wrong. I'm sorry. It's late. I'm tired when I'm recording this video. From Wakanda, from the Dora Milaje, and all the female characters are just there, and we have this big panoramic, dramatic shot. And I'm like, so could they be any more heavy-handed? So I just don't believe, even though they're using nostalgia bait to try to get us to watch these last two movies, which are going to be the last ones with these main cast actors that we fell in love with. And they're going to make they keep making the same mistakes. They're going to make the same mistake with Chris Evans that they made in the comics. They're going to bring him back as Captain Hydra. That was one of the worst things that happened to Captain America in the comics, and he's never recovered from it. And so they're going to do the same thing in the movies. Because what they do is they say, it didn't work in the comics. People hated it. So let's do that again. Let's do some more of that. And so, so whatever. So I don't believe that Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars is going to have the impact that they want. And I do believe that they're going to reboot the MCU with mainly all new actors, because I think they're going to make the mistake of not making a clean break. For example, I'm sure the Fantastic Four actors are still going to be there, which is another reason they shouldn't have cast them so old to begin with. They should have cast the Fantastic Four much younger than they did if they want them to hang around until the new reboot. Because we're talking 10, 12, 15 years out. And then, they've been talking about having Cynthia Erivo play Storm, Aurora Monroe, and wrong actress for that character. So, I don't think the wokeness is going to go away as long as Feige's in charge. And I think they're going to keep doing what they've been doing, which is shoving characters we don't want, race and gender swapping and sexual orientation swapping characters we do want, and then having the absolute wrong actors play those characters. I believe they're going to keep on with that pattern, because I don't see why they wouldn't. So the only way that changes is if Bob Iger prevails and says making money is our business and our priority. And so if we have to dial down the social commentary and ramp up the action and good stories, then maybe. But like I said, we are past fatigue. We are into apathy, just don't care no more. Captain America Brave New World box office proves that. Thunderbolts, in particular, box office proves that we just don't care anymore. Just don't care. The glory days are gone. We have the MCU from 2008 to Endgame, and we're going to enjoy that. We're going to enjoy Captain America Winter Soldier. We're going to enjoy when the MCU was good. Everything after that, starting with WandaVision on Disney Plus, has just been a step down. The Marvels, the lowest grossing movie in the MCU. I think they barely scratched 200 million for a Marvel movie. That used to be a money printer. You said it was an MCU movie. You could print money. And the Marvels barely broke the $200 million mark. And I really like Iman Vellani as Ms. Marvel. I think she's perfect. She's a literal fangirl in real life, and Ms. Marvel as a character is a fangirl. And I think Iman Vellani is perfect as Kamala Khan. It's just that Kamala Khan is not popular. She's another character that they've tried to make happen. They're even shoehorning her now into classic X-Men stories to try to make her happen. Kamala Khan just has never caught. She not going to catch on. Ironheart not going to catch on. The only one that has a chance to catch on is Kate Bishop. That's only because she's being played by Haley Steinfeld, because she's quite popular. That's the only one of the new Avengers that I think even has a wing of a prayer of a chance of catching on. So I just don't think the future has an upswing. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm telling you up front, they're going to have to convince me. They're going to have to convince a lot of people. I'm going to have to hear nothing but good things about these movies and all that. But we've hit that apathetic state. It's just like when your relationship dies. If you have a intimate relationship with your spouse, and both of you get to the point where you just don't care anymore. Once you get to the point where you've hit apathy, see, because when you hate, you still care. When you're angry, you still care. Once you hit I don't care if you live or die, I don't care if I see you or not, I don't care what you do, then it's dead. It's dead. That's where the audience is with this stuff. Again, reflected by Captain America Brave New World numbers and the Thunderbolts in particular, those numbers and the numbers for the Marvels. Just don't care. Okay? So that's it for this weekly comic shot. I wanted to talk about Hemsworth's announcement, and I want to talk about Thor himself, but I also wanted to talk about where I think we're going. So I want to hear your comments. So I want you to leave me some comments below about what do you think about Hemsworth's statement? What do you think about Thor's ending? What do you think about the nostalgia bait that they're using for Secret Wars and Doomsday? And what do you think the new MCU is going to look like? Now, I'm probably going to do some more videos on that, but I want to start the conversation now. So I want you to tell me what you think the new MCU is going to be like, because I firmly believe it's going to be the new Avengers, front and center. And, woke X-Men and these much older Fantastic Four. That's what I think, and ain't nobody going to watch that. Okay? That's it. I will see you next week for my next weekly live comics chat. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. DT2 Comics Chat out.